Hey there, I'm Karen Marie, and this is Psyched Up for Sunday, September 27th, 2020. Today, I am going to be interviewing my dear friend Elaine McDaniel. Elaine and I met 27 years ago through homeschooling circles. We're both longtime homeschoolers. Elaine is a wellness coach, a health and wellness coach, a herbalist, and a registered yoga instructor. So I'm going to start though by talking about the current transits briefly, and then we'll get into interviewing with Elaine because we've got some really important transits I want everybody to know about. Starting with September 29th, Tuesday, Saturn goes direct. It's been retrograde for 6 months in Capricorn. This is Saturn in Capricorn is our institutions and our laws and how we form things and our rules and all that kind of stuff. And it's been really wreaking havoc. It is conjunct Pluto, which is death and transformation, and also Jupiter, which expands things. So this has been, these three together in the skies is called a stellium, have been hanging out together in Capricorn since the beginning of the year. Saturn actually went up into Aquarius briefly earlier this year. In fact, when the Congress passed laws here in the United States to pay everyone is when Saturn, the rule maker, was in Aquarius, the sign of humanity. So now it's gone back into Capricorn, the good old boys network, the way we've always done things here. So we're, this hardish energy has been going on. But Pluto may have been demoted in astronomy as a planet, but in astrology, it's still a very powerful player, and it represents death and transformation. And anything Pluto gets close to, it transforms. And in this case, it is transforming all these rules, how we form things, and not just us here in the United States, all over the globe. And then personally, we're all having a restructuring of our personal lives. Now that's all going on. It's beside the pandemic, and that's what the astrology is saying. It's showing up as the pandemic is, creating the space for that to happen. And then Jupiter, which expands things and expands our knowledge and our understanding of things, is shining a big light, magnifying this energy. Right now we have Mars retrograde in Aries, and it's squaring this party. And Mars is not alone. He also has Eris, which is like the goddess of war and destruction and awakening, is right there. Mars, the god of war, along with Eris, this goddess of war. And then we have Black Lilith, which represents our fears. Our fears are of the future, our deep-seated fears that we bring with us from past lives. They're all in a gang together. We got the Aries gang and the Capricorn gang squaring off with each other. The Capricorn gang, this slower moving outer planets, have more power. The Aries gang is more about our personal response to it. And right now, with the square off, it's stirring up a lot of our inner crap, really, and how we've done things before. Anybody with unresolved anger issues, OMG, it's been triggered with this stellium and this square off. On October 1st, we'll have a full moon in Aries. It'll be 4:05 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to be at 9 degrees of Aries, and that means the sun is at 9 degrees of Libra at the time. So these two squaring off opposite each other, the sun and the moon, which is always what's going down in a full moon. The sun in Libra is all about balance and trying to find justice and peace and all that. It's also about relationships, and it can be a predisposition towards codependency. And then Aries is about self-empowerment and how you feel about yourself and what can I do to the situation. Full moons are illuminating factors. They bring a light, an insight. Another interesting factor about this full moon is that Chiron, which represents the wounded healer, it's where we've been wounded in past lives, where it has shown up in wounding in our own life. That's where Chiron in your personal chart shows up. And then the transiting Chiron in Aries has been bringing up like how you feel about yourself. And this is for everybody on the planet right now, really highlighting what kind of wounds you may be carrying about your self-identity, how you feel about yourself, where your wounds or your hurt is in terms of what's happened to you in this lifetime. And so the full moon is going to be 2 degrees off of Chiron. Chiron's at 7 degrees of Aries right now, retrograde. So the full moon is going to be illuminating these areas of woundedness. And particularly, I think, codependency and in relationships, like where you've been wounded in relationships, I think will be highlighted. Full moons are always an opportunity to grab some insight, have some downloads spiritually, intuitively, psychically. So it's a wonderful time to go, OMG, now I see why I've been projecting this and then getting this back in return. Let's see, what else do I need to cover? Okay, moving into next month, we will have Mercury going retrograde. We have Mars already going retrograde. Saturn is turning direct, so it will be moving forward again, and by the end of the year, be moving back into Aquarius. And then Jupiter will be following into next year, and so both of these outer planets moving into Aquarius will feel like a bit of a liftoff from this intensity of the stellium bond that they've been. It's like the gang's all here in Capricorn. So we'll feel some of that liftoff. We still have tremendous transformative times. Pluto's going to be in Capricorn until 2024. So that's when it begins to move into Aquarius. And then we'll really see some major shifts. But Pluto will continue to, it's like a demolition crew, wrecking ball, taking down the old things that don't work for us in our society, in our personal lives, so that we can build new things in its place. So Mercury goes retrograde. What date do I have on that? October 13th. It'll be retrograde at 11 degrees of Scorpio, and it'll retrograde back to 25 degrees of Libra. So it's already like at 29 degrees of Libra now. So we've already been in the shadow of Mercury retrograde. So what's come up over the last few days, this last week, may be a foreshowing of what the Mercury retrograde thing will be, because it will. And in Scorpio, where it will be when it goes retrograde, it's about bringing up deep level secrets and deep-seated fears, and it's very intuitive, so you can have some deep transformational experience. Scorpio is death and transformation, much like Pluto energy is. So, but what's interesting to me is that both Mercury and Mars retrograde heading into our national elections here. Mercury actually goes direct on November 3rd. Mars goes direct on the 13th of November. So we're going to have this intensity. I mean, people usually know about Mercury retrograde. It affects your communication and your transportation and your technology. So when Mercury goes retrograde, communications can break down in interpersonal ways, in computers and phones and cars and travel. So that's a normal thing going on all the time. And this is like on top of this square off. And another thing, when Pluto and Eris first squared off is when the protests started a couple months back. And so they're still square for the rest of the year too. So the astrologers that I follow personally have all been saying this time now, as we start this week and into October and into mid-November, are the gnarliest times we've seen. Like, we haven't seen the worst of it yet. Like, you think 2020's been bad? Breathe deep and hold on to your seatbelts, because it's about to get worse. Now, what can you do with that? It is a time of great transformational power if you go inside. Like, environment's always a reflection of ourselves. So it is paramount to really plug in with spiritual practices. You can do great, amazing inner work right now. You can really do personal changes you've wanted to do your whole lifetime right now. So that's where the power is. I would suggest turning off the news and getting out of the frequency of social media and really getting into peace and quiet. Go out into nature, ground yourself, because when you're grounded and when you're spiritually fit and when you're plugged up, that's the energy you're putting out and contributing to the planet. When you're spinning and freaking out and in worry, fear, anxiety, anger, you're adding to the problem. So we can be solution makers. We can be light workers here. This is where light workers, it's time for all hands to be on deck right now, because we are going through the most transformational times of our entire lives, really. that's how I'm going to call that. So I feel like that's all I need to say about the astrology right now. All right, so I'm going to go back to Elaine now. So I have in my notes that you have been studying herbology. Am I saying that correctly?
Oh, some people herbology. I call it herbs.
I would study herbs.
I would be an herbalist.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Since you were 20 years old, so that's a good amount of time, a handful of decades there that you've been studying that. And then, so now you're also offering health and wellness coaching, personal coaching, and you also are a registered yoga instructor. So I want to hear about how you got into herbs. Like, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing to dive off into to study when you're 20 years old. So tell me more about that.
All right. Well, I was kind of a sick kid. I started getting pneumonia and bronchitis like yearly when I was, I don't know, second grade or so. And it would take over my life for 2 or 3 months. Like I missed months of school sometimes because I was so ill all the time. And when I was 20, I just happened to be dating this chiropractor, and it happened to be the season that would start the whole pneumonia / bronchitis event. And he gave me 3 pills. Now this isn't herbs, but it's definitely alternative that I took these 3 pills, 3 little blue pills. He gave me a couple little packages, and I didn't
have red ones as well. I'm just kidding.
Right. I took the blue ones. They were A, C, and zinc, vitamin A, vitamin C, and zinc. And I didn't get sick. So that really got my attention. And then I got into, ginger for this and echinacea for that, and kind of considered myself into at the time. And then in 1990, when my second son was born, a couple of months into it, he started getting pretty ill, and he spent 6 months being quite ill. And at that point, I went to see a medical doctor here in Austin who also did herbs and nutrition. And I mean, he was pretty strict with me. It's like, you either do what I say or don't bother coming back. And I was pretty desperate because my son was so ill. And within a week, he was no longer ill. Wow. And it turned out, I mean, we used a lot of different herbs, but it turned out to be a milk allergy, which is really common, which kind of started my path of how nutrition and food is medicine as well, and could be poison. You know, just a simple thing like a piece of cheese can be to somebody, and it
preach.
Yeah. Oh, I could go on. Anyway, that's basically how I got into it. And then my son being so ill made me take a step further into it. And since then, I've gone to many herb classes and done many walks and given classes.
So I've done that with you before, which was very cool. We went to a friend of mine's land, and you walked with us over the land and were pointing out, that's medicinal, that's edible, that's poisonous. You can do this for that, you can do that for that. So that was super cool. So that's a service that you offer people as well. If they would like for you to come to their property or their land, that you can help them see what's growing right there on their own turf, correct?
Yeah, I've done more than 1 or 2 of those. I enjoy that. That's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I like going onto the land. I was actually, since we're talking about intuition, it was one of my biggest herbal lessons was with a local herb group here in Austin. It was in probably 2006. And they sent us out to talk to this one plant, and I was going, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do about that. And so we found the plant, and I had this whole conversation with the plant, and I really kind of refused it at first. And it basically kept saying, just lay down. It's like, it's dirty here. I don't want to lay down. It kept saying, just lay down.
And where were you hearing this lay down? Was that just something you were hearing or feeling
Up
or sensing?
It was just something I just knew, right? I mean, that's kind of what we'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, so I finally laid down and I got this nettle on the back of my arm and I'm going, well, great. And so I looked around and there were 2 plants there that I knew would help with the nettle. And so I got one of them and I was just kind of rubbing it on there. And this plant that I was supposed to be having the conversation with said, wow, look at my leaves. Don't I kind of look like a poison ivy? You might try that. Just take off my little, it was an agarita bush and they've got little points on the ends of the leaves. And so I took those little points off and rubbed it up and it was almost like instant relief. And so then we're supposed to go back and tell the leaders of this herb group what we discovered. And usually I'm not the one that's going to go, oh, I'll go first. But I did. And I hit every one of the points. I mean, that plant told me everything. And so when you asked me to do this, I was going, oh my gosh, I mean, what do I talk about? Intuition, how do you talk about that? And that was the thing that came up, was the plant. And it was basically just be still and listen. If
Right.
you're not going to listen, then you don't get the intuition.
Right. You have to
Right.
somehow turn your own mind and the little computer here, get it to quiet down, or at least go to the back room so that you can be open for something new coming in.
Right. And don't question, was that me or was that intuition? Because my experience, and maybe this isn't yours, maybe my spirit guide is a bit of a jester. My experience is I start questioning whether that was intuitive or am I making it up, then I get all kinds of weird stuff.
Mm. Yeah, when I first started trying to develop my abilities back in the day, I started it because I was told by psychics I was going to see that I was very psychic and that I would be doing readings, and every time I got that information, I'm like, what? Like, I was clueless that I was empathic and getting so much information just in my body about what other people were feeling. Like, I wasn't aware that some of my distress and dis-ease was about other people's stuff I had picked up on. And I stumbled into channeling, which is information moving through me. But once I had that experience, like the first time I had a channeled experience, there was like this, it felt like something was moving into the top of my head. And I just felt like goosebumps down my arms, on the sides of my face. It was like, it almost felt like electrical energy moving through me. And so because I'm a feeler, it was easy for me to discern, ooh, here comes information, rather than, what do I think? What do I know? Because it's different. And I would just start to tune in. Is this coming from my brain? Or is this something I'm feeling like I know, or that it's moving through me, or coming from some sort of higher source than me? And it was a difference in the vibe. If it came with like, you should, or you need to, or that was my mind. Whereas the intuitive promptings or suggestion would be, wouldn't you love to? Wouldn't it be fabulous if, it would be great if it's a very loving, let's carry you along down the river kind of an energy, versus the taskmaster, sort of that Capricorn energy I was talking about, was totally what I was raised with. This is how you need to do things. This is the box you need to stay in. You don't step outside the box. You know, and we're really trained in this society that the mind is king. It's all about amassing knowledge, and the more knowledge you are, the better person you are, and the more degrees that you have. But you can get yourself really out of balance if you're not in touch with this intuitive voice, which to me is the connection with your own higher self. I think everybody's equipped and wired with psychic intuition, just like everybody can see, hear, taste, and touch. And just like some people are blind and some people are deaf, there are some people who are just blocked with their intuition. But the majority of people have intuition. It just shows up differently. Some people are visual. They can see auras around plants or people or things, or they see their spirit guides, or they see ghosts. Other people like me are just feelers. They can feel everything emotionally. Some people can get information off of the things they touch, or some people are telepathic. I'm glad I don't have that one. They can actually feel what other people are thinking. I had 2 kids that were really showing strong telepathic abilities when they were small. you know, in fact, the greatest intel, I think, comes out of 3 and 4-year-olds' mouths because their society hasn't gotten to them to tell them what they should believe and what's right and what's wrong. And they're just wide open little channels themselves, I have found. So let's go back to your work. If someone was to schedule an appointment with you as a personal health and wellness coach, what goes down? Like, tell me a little bit about your one-on-one work with people.
Well, so my health and wellness coaching has been trained through the Functional Medicine Academy, which it was a year-long program. It was almost like a part-time job. There was a lot of detail into it, and it's based around positive psychology, and also not me being an expert. So, which has been a bit of a struggle for me because I'm an Aquarian.
You know everything. Now, and I will have to say that I've often introduced you to people as my girlfriend Elaine. I learn something new from her every time we connect. Like, you're a wealth of information. You can put the Encyclopedia Britannica to shame with what you have amassed in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, you're not the only one. So, so health and wellness coaching is really not about me telling you what to do, because we've been told what to do too many times, but what are you willing to do? So Karen Marie, you really need to get exercise in your life. That's what your goal is. And so it's not me saying, well, all right, so you're going to get out and run today, and I'm going to call you and see if you ran. That's not what we're after. We're going to talk about what excites you, what are you willing to do, and how can you make it happen? And if, you know, I worked with this one woman that's probably, I don't know, probably 100 pounds overweight, and she's doing really well. I mean, she's losing weight. And so it's like, you know, we talk about that, but she needs to add exercise. And so it's hard on her to exercise. 100 pounds is really hard on your joints, but you can walk to the mailbox and back, you know, and you can sit in your chair and do little leg lifts and things like that. So I give creative ideas to see if it's something you're willing to try. Sometimes all I do is ask somebody to think about where that space might be. You know, just, can we make a goal this week of looking for a place that you could add a little bit of movement? You know, things like that. It's not about me telling you what to do, which is funny because my dad was a coach. So when it was like, I was thinking, I don't really want to be a coach. But it's totally different than sports. It's really about, hey, so what? You didn't get to the mailbox this week. It's really okay. You know, what did you do well? What did you do right? What did you do that was exciting? Let's not talk about your failures. Let's talk about what is exciting and brings joy into your life. We had to do coaching in our own class, and somebody was coaching me, and the first coach was not a good, I mean, she was a school teacher, first of all. So she was always so proud of me, and, you know, she talked to me like a little girl and that kind of stuff. And I really
So
thought
that went over well.
not what I thought. The second coach that I had did not even pretend to know as much as I do. I mean, she didn't even go there, and I really appreciated that. But she also said, let's look for what excites you in life. Let's get you back into, and she got me into a couple of photography contests. And
yeah, you're also an amazing photographer. I've used you myself, so yeah.
And she
bag of tricks you have. I said bag of tricks that you have.
I have a few. So you know, basically what she did with me is I got a couple of my pictures in frames. I put a couple on my website, and, you know, there's more work to do, but it was more about finding joy in order to move forward and make changes, and to find something positive in order to move forward and make changes.
So people could come to you for anything they want help on, and you can help them with it. Is this true?
Even if I clue what it is. Like I've worked with one woman who was doing, I can't even remember the name of the diet, like me 40, I can't remember the name of the diet.
Matter. There's thousands of diets out there. So.
And she knew what it was. So it
Mm.
was just basically, what steps do you need to take to get back on track?
Mm-hmm.
And do you want me to hold you responsible? Can I text you and say, how's it going? You know, I will ask you how it went next week, those kinds of things. And just being held accountable sometimes. You know, I mean, when I'm held accountable, I'm more likely to sit down and make something happen.
Okay, so I want to stop and make sure that people know how they can get in touch with you. So your website is called?
ChangeMadeWithEase.com.
Okay, and they can email or contact you at that same name at Gmail, correct? ChangeMadeWithEase@Gmail is also how someone can get in touch with you, or through your website. Okay, so if they wanted to schedule a session or find out more about your work, you can go to Elaine's website. So I don't want to forget to plug how people can get in touch with you. So is there anything else about your work? So private yoga instruction you also offer? You can do individual or groups with yoga as well? Tell me about how you incorporate that and what you're doing with people.
I teach a group, but I also have done private sessions, and I do a little bit of Thai yoga. I learned, I'm a class 1, whatever that means, with Paya, which is passive assisted yoga, P-A-Y-A, passive assisted yoga alignment. I was like, why am I trying to get assisted in there twice? So it's basically all my training in yoga is in alignment base, which is Iyengar. And the reason I go with Iyengar is, well, back in '90, I was prescribed by my herb doctor to start taking yoga classes for my thyroid. And my first yoga class was an Iyengar class. Excuse me, I've got some mold stuff going on. But after that class, and Iyengar is about precision placement of your hands and your legs and your muscles and, you know, what's going on here. And if you can't get into that precise place, then we've got props to help you. And it's really, it's pretty amazing, because after the very first class that I had, I realized that night that it may have been the first time in my memory that I didn't have pain in my back. I have a little bit of scoliosis in my back, and so it's always kind of just a little painful. And from then on, I started practicing. I have a 2-hour-a-day practice that I've been doing, not every single day, but since 1991.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, spiritual practices, which I feel like yoga is a spiritual practice as well as what it does for your body. It does so much for your spirit as well. Like right now, like spiritual practices of all sorts and kinds are paramount. I've been, practicing Buddhism for 36 years, chanting in the morning and the evening. I have been adding to that practice also silent meditation to just up my connection with the divine right now, so that I am not, as an empath, tapped into the people flipping it and losing it, and so many people in deep grief and trauma and like going down. It's like it insulates me when I do that inner work from just the onslaught of the world. It's, I just think it's super important. So I wanted to talk, speaking of what's going on in the world, so many people now are having to homeschool their children now, either with just facilitating them doing that online with others. And I know a lot of people have just said, F the school system, I'm just going to do this myself. And then, oh, what did I do? So I've been homeschooling since my oldest was in first grade. I put her in public kindergarten, which is what confirmed to me that I needed to homeschool her. I'd already met a friend Carol Hager, I'll do a shout out to Carol, who was homeschooling, and she had known from the time her child was born that she was going to be homeschooling. So I would just be like picking her brain, asking her questions every time we'd run into each other. We're like, oh, it was just so interesting. And she's the one that introduced me to the Austin area homeschoolers, which is where I met you at a park day like 27 years ago. And I was pregnant with my number 3 out of 6 children at the time. So Malachi, I was pregnant with Malachi, who just turned 27. So that's how I can know how long we've known each other, because I remember that first park day being big and pregnant and meeting you, and you had 2 children at the time, and you ended up adding a third. So so tell me why you got into homeschooling.
Well, my whole theory here about children and their way that they learn is like, some people are square pegs, maybe 80% of the people are square pegs, and the rest of us are triangles and diamonds, and we don't fit in that square peg. And I was obviously one of those, because I was
like
a slow
diamond.
learner.
I like that image of it. We're diamonds.
Yeah, just the diamond. I didn't fit into the square peg at all. And my whole education was just like total lost. I was just lost all the time. So when my daughter was 4 years old and already knew the alphabet and could tell you could count to 20 in Spanish and all that stuff, we put her in a private school here in Austin at 4 years old in kindergarten. And by the end, she was 5 years old by the end of the school year. But the last 6 weeks of that school year were pretty difficult in ways that you wouldn't expect. Like, I'd get there and she had her little red mark because she didn't get to go out for recess. And it's like, well, so why didn't you go out for recess? And she says, well, I didn't do my math paper. And it's like, so why didn't you do your math paper? And she said, well, Mom, 1 + 1 is 2, and it's going to be 2. And I don't know why I have to write it down again. And it's like, oh, okay. And then when the reading came along, and it was, I say go spot go, because that's those little silly readers that we had in school. And it was like, go, 1 page, spot. And then, it was just the same word over and over. So it was a very similar book to that. And she had no patience for that stuff. So she was going to be going into the 1st grade in a slow reading group. And that just, there's my baggage. So I thought, well, no, we're not going to do the slow reading stuff. I don't want my kid to be a slow learner, because she definitely is not. So we got into, we decided to homeschool at that point, and I bought a John Holt book, which there weren't a whole lot of homeschooling books back then. And he was basically, not everybody learns to read at the same rate. And let them go till they're 12 years old. If they're not reading by the time they're 12, then we got a problem. So I thought, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. So we learned spelling and we learned vocabulary, but I didn't force the reading. I did lots and lots of reading to them. We also listened to lots and lots of audiobooks. So they got lots of language and lots of things, lots of material for daydreaming, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it sounds very, my oldest daughter and your oldest daughter are kind of cut from a similar cloth. And Khadijah, my oldest, was also reading, and she was talking in full sentences at 18 months. So she was like ahead of the game. And just like your daughter she just went to public kindergarten. We were living out in Taylor at the time. And she was supposed to be sitting and coloring the letter A, and then sitting quietly in her desk while other people were finishing. And she has ADHD, and so she couldn't sit still, A, and B, was bored out her brain in terms of the tasks that they were giving her to do. And I was getting notes sent home in her Friday packets every week about disciplinary stuff. And this was my turning point moment and why I started homeschooling. I get her Friday packet of all the work she'd done that week, and in the middle of the packet was an envelope. So I'm like, what's this? And so I opened the envelope, and there's 2 notes that were sent home for my signature that my 5-year-old had signed, forged my name to, and given back to the teacher. I'm like, okay. And I was already toying with the idea of homeschooling, and that's what did it to me. Like, okay, we're going to go home. We're going to let you just be you. I went to a homeschooling conference up in Dallas around this same time when I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm doing. And at park days, I would be asking mom, well, how do you do math? How do y'all do science? How do you do this? How do you do that? Like, I just was asking all the other homeschool moms a bazillion questions. And I went to this workshop that had, John Holt was actually at that workshop in his books. And there were all kinds of, you know, approaches to parenting and approaches to homeschooling that were being offered, you know, discipline stuff and homeschooling stuff. And this one woman gave her experience with unschooling, which I had never heard that term before. But she basically, to me, that's the intuitive approach of paying attention to what your child, where their interests are, and naturally facilitating that interest. For example, her oldest son was interested in planes from an early age. So they would get model planes for him to put together. They would always be playing with planes. They'd go to the airport and sit and watch the planes take off and land. Whenever they could, they'd take trips, you know, they'd do the field trip to friends that would let him get on the plane. And, you know, and then he went from homeschooling into the military and became a pilot. Like that, you know, it was like, it was his whole track of life. And it was basically, you can trust your child. Like the premise that we have to force all this information into people, and you have to learn this and you have to learn that. The premise that she said was like, children, human beings, are naturally inquisitive. They naturally love to learn and explore their environment. If you just keep facilitating the places they're interested in learning, wow, you know, it'll just be huge. And so I was like, I had a huge aha moment then. And we would throw workbooks and do other things that weren't quite unschooling. My kids hated workbooks though. Anytime I would get workbooks for them to do whatever, you know, they would usually get halfway through the book and, you know, grow tired of it. But then there was, you know, like you, my first two daughters were quick to learn. I read to them lots. And then my son came along and he wasn't quick to read. Like I remember him tossing a book across the room when he was like 5 or 6. I suck at this. And I'm like, okay, well, we won't try to do reading. He likes to cook. Want to cook? You know, and so, and because, you know, I had so many children that we were always doubling or tripling recipes, and what a wonderful place to learn all kinds of things, math, science, chemistry, you know, as you're doubling a recipe, there's all kinds of things involved. And so when I started looking at it like that, oh, wow, there's inherent learning in everything. And another thing I pulled out is look for the teachable moment, which is when they ask you a question, rather than to just give them the answer, show them how to fish, how to go find that answer themselves. And so, you know, we would go to back before the internet, we'd go to the library once a week and check out books and check out videos and let them just pick whatever. And we would do as many field trips, hands-on personal learning things as we could. And we joined the Friday co-op, which you did as well, that met just on Fridays. It was a group of about 30 homeschooling families that would have 3 different classes and a lunchtime. To me, it was like utopia. It takes a village, a tribe raising children together experience. It was the most beautiful experience out of all my homeschooling, to be a part of this tribe that you know, we'd get together once a semester and the parents will go, well, I'll offer this class. And the kids would get together, well, I want to learn this. And so we'd put all those together, and like my kids would take woodworking or, you know, chemistry in the kitchen or belly dancing, or like they took just so many interesting things. And then my son, who was not learning, I just backed off. And like you had heard, well, Waldorf doesn't try to begin to teach them to read until they're 9. And it's not important when they learn to read, it's important that they learn to read. And that also was a thing I repeated to myself over and over and over again. And he was about 9 when he started bringing me Berenstain Bear books and wanted to read those with me. And then he got on to Japanese anime, which he had to read in English subtitles. And that's where he really picked up the pace of his reading. And I came into, because my rules were during the day up until 5 o'clock, if they turned on the TV, it had to be on PBS. We didn't have cable, so it had to be PBS or nothing during the day. And then if they got on, once we did have computers, when they got on the computer during the day, it had to be educational. They could be playing educational games, but they couldn't just be playing video games. And this is way before Fortnite and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's a lot more challenging now, but setting those kind of boundaries, I feel like are important as well, in that kind of thing. And then the same child who would have been labeled as slow and put in the remedial class if I put him into public school when he wasn't reading at 8 or 9. When I did put him into school, like all my older 5 children all transitioned into school by high school. My second and third homeschooled up until their freshman year in high school. And Samantha, my number 2, went into the performing arts high school here in town in the theater department. She had taken some acting classes that I had bartered with a friend who was an acting coach, given her readings, and she gave my kids acting classes. And that's when I'll do a shout out to Marcy Winters, inspired Samantha to become an actress. And so she did acting at McCallum, and now she's out in LA pursuing acting out there. So it's like got her on her track. And then Malachi was more interested in cooking than anything else. So we picked Travis High School in town, which has a culinary program, and he thought he was going to be a chef. So he went in, and I tried to talk him into some honors classes when we were registering him his freshman year. No, not interested in that. So not only did he make straight A's, he didn't think I taught him anything because we were unschoolers. He thought he was going to be behind everybody. So instead of being behind, he actually made straight A's in all 8 classes his freshman year. And in 4 out of those 8 classes had a 100 average for the entire year, including biology and algebra, which I had not taught him. And then he graduated valedictorian. So, that's my big, I was going out on a limb with a hypothesis that homeschooling my kids was not going to F them up. My mother was convinced I was destroying my children because I was homeschooling them. So I didn't get any support from her, but I found soul sisters like you in the homeschooling circle, and I think you had a similar experience in terms of like your kids testing out or something on a, tell me about that.
Well, my daughter she just insisted on going to school. So we put her in 9th grade, and they wanted to test her. And I was really nervous because, it's like, well, I don't teach all that stuff. But she tested out of the 9th grade. She, like everything but drama, she tested out of. So that was pretty nice. And then she was in junior, when she was in 9th grade age, she was in junior level classes. And, there was just a lot of issues, and they were personality issues, and they basically, like any teenager, all she could see is hypocrisy. I say like a lot of teenagers. Right. So it turned into this real war, and we basically took her out of the 9th grade and put her in the community college, where they treated her like a human being, and she was among people that gave respect and got respect, versus what happened in the high school. My son, he wanted to go to school, and when he tested in, they had a pre-Civil War history test that he had to take, and I was really nervous about that. I wasn't so nervous about the math and the English as I was the pre-Civil War history, but he made a 97 on it.
Was he guessing? Really good. I feel my kids learn so much from their peers and homeschooling. I mean, to me, the number one question I would get from people that weren't homeschooling is like, what about socialization? And I would just throw that right back. Yeah, what about that socialization in the public school system? Like, it's not about learning. It's about tearing each other down and the pecking order and that kind of stuff, And even now, the kids are socializing through the internet on all the social media, is where they're getting lots of social, not as much one-on-one, of course, right now, but COVID, but still, it's definitely not something that I think anybody needs to worry about, My youngest son is the only one out of all 6 of my kids who hasn't, I would say he would never had a day in school, but we did take a full he would be a senior now. He's studying for his GED right now. He's already studied all the modules, and he's now tutoring with his older brother on the science and math stuff. He feels a little bit of weakness in before he goes and tests for his GED. But he found his calling when he was he did his first professional music gig when he was 9 years old, and already knew, I'm going to be a musician. He's in 2 hot bands in town, Professor Rafe and the Fables and Tinted Vision, with both have lots of songs out on streaming sources you can download and stuff. And so, in fact, he had five gigs during South by that were canceled, South by Southwest, and so to me, COVID has given me the opportunity of having this baby, my last little chickie, back in the nest a little bit and savoring these last minutes of parenting and mothering before he goes. So it's been a beautiful experience for me, the COVID thing. I was already doing 90% of my work over the phone. We were already homeschooling, so yeah. I had another.
Well, homeschooling thing. One is Caitlin, my daughter, did not learn to read until she was 11 years old. I mean, she knew, but it wasn't forced. And the first book she picked up was Anne McCaffrey. Anne McCaffrey is an adult reader. It's like, oh, wow. You went from no go spot go to an adult reader. So
Yeah.
It made me have to be a voracious reader too, to keep up with her, just to make sure that what she was reading was not something I didn't want her reading. So I had to do a lot more reading. My son, though, learned that you can just get by in the public school. So he learned that in order to play the sports, which was the whole reason he wanted to go to the public school, was to play sports. And you could play sports if you made a 70. And now what he didn't understand was, why do I have to go to school for 8 hours every day and I come home with 2 hours of homework? When we homeschooled, we were only doing 2 hours of work, period.
Right.
Yeah. There's I think a big misnomer in, well, also I think one of the, and this probably hits that intuitive thing in a way, is that I never forced my children to learn things they didn't want to learn. It's like, sure, let's stop and watch this spider,
Right.
do a web. And let's talk about spider webs and spiders and, how many different kinds of webs there are, versus, no, today we're learning about ancient Egypt. So sit down and we're going to drone through a bunch of, dates and names that mean nothing. Instead, we took a lot of the Waldorf approach, and it's like, so we're going to talk Greek today, and we're going to eat Greek today, and we're going to speak, we're going to do science in Greek, and, we're going to only write Greek letters. And that's the way we learned mythology and, different cultures and things like that. It wasn't Ponce de Leon marched across Texas in whatever date it was. Who cares?
Yeah, because I did a traditional public school throughout my whole, and I was always making A's and some B's, and I was top 10% of my class in high school. I learned how to study and what they would need on the test. So I would memorize stuff before the night of a test and ace the test, and then promptly forget what it was that so I learned the system in, like you said, your son, his objective was just to pass. My objective was to do well on the test and do well in class. And I knew what I needed to do to make that A, but that did not translate to, I learned that material. I learned how to make A's, which is a whole different function. So I felt like everything I had learned was a complete wash, and I did some years of college to never finish my degree there. I have a story I remember I was going to tell about Rafe when, so Genoa and Jaden, my number 4 and number 5, Genoa went into school in junior high, and she wasn't reading. She also was an Aquarian. I know it all. And I'm like, she wouldn't let me help her in any way, was not interested. But I was beginning to be concerned as a 6th grade age that she wasn't reading yet. So I put her in school, like, well, does school make you read? Like, if you want to, and she did. She got what she needed, and she graduated from high school early, long story short. So she got on track just fine. And then Jaden, my number 5, after Genoa went into school, he was like, I want to go to school. It was like 2 weeks later. And he just caught me at I'm fine, whatever. And so he went in the middle of 5th grade. Did middle of 4th grade, did 5th grade, and then was in Magnet junior high. My oldest daughter, Khadijah, had homeschooled from first through fourth. We put her in 2 different fifth grades because we moved in the middle of her 5th grade year. She did half of 6th grade, then back to homeschooling for half of 6th, and then she went into magnet junior high and graduated. So all 5 of mine that are already 23 and up have high school degrees, and 3 of those now also have college degrees. 3 of my kiddos have college degrees as well. Now, Rafe, so after Genoa and Jaden went to school, it was just Malachi who was still at home, my oldest son, and Rafe. And then when Malachi went into high school, Rafe was by himself. He goes, well, I want to go to school. And I'm like, okay, let's go explore that. Let's go take a field trip to your school. So he would have been like a 2nd grade age. So we went up to the local elementary school, and I carried, you know, everything he would need. I said, well, I'm going to take everything they're going to need, your birth certificate and your conscientious objection form for vaccination, since I did not vaccinate my children. I already had the forms ready to fill out if need be. And I go, we'll explore the school. We'll see what classroom you would be in. And then it'll be your choice. If you want to go into school, we'll register you. And after your little visit to school, if you want to keep homeschooling, then we can keep homeschooling. It'll be your choice. Like, I didn't want him to feel like I was making him homeschool, right? So we go up to the local elementary school. The assistant principal was the one that greeted us, and I said, well, we're homeschoolers, but we want to take a field trip into the classroom that you would put him in if he were to register for school. And he was kind of snickering at me and like walked us out to a portable where we went in. It was a woman who was, quite frankly, obese, that was teaching a class of 2nd graders, and they had their little desks put in groups of 5 little clumps, and there was a desk open at a little module where 2 of the 4 kids were actually kids that live in our neighborhood, and he knew. And there was a desk sitting by itself at the back of the room that I sat down in, and the teacher invited Rafe to sit down at the desk, and he was like, no, he wanted to stand beside me at the back of the room and just watch. The teacher was lecturing on fact versus opinion. It was a great classroom scene because the kids couldn't care less. They were dicking with each other. She was handing out demerits. She didn't have control of the classroom at all. And these kids weren't absorbing anything. She finally got on the overhead projector and started writing out examples of fact versus opinions. And then some little light bulbs went off, and some kids began to work. And there were still others that were dicking with each other, still could not care less. And we had been in the room maybe 10 minutes. Rafe comes up to me and just goes, and I'm like, don't you want to stay and see what they do next? That was it. He never brought up school again. So he's always felt like homeschooling was his choice, you know, and is, you know, happy. And in addition to playing bass in both of these bands that I mentioned, he also plays guitar and piano and drums, and he plays a little sax, a little flute, a little ukulele, like, and what he does during the day is just rove between instruments every day. I hear him play every day the bass, the guitar, and the drums. Those are his favorites, and he'll get on the piano more than the other minor instruments he plays. But I thought about McCallum, the performing arts school, for him for high school, and we talked about that when he was junior high age. Do you want to go to the same school your sister went? Maybe focus on the music department there's great. And he thought about it. We spent months talking about and bringing it up, and he said his decision was like, I think school would cut into my practice time.
Yes, it would.
You're probably right. If you know you want to be a musician, then what you need most is proficiency on your instruments. And so, yeah, so that's that story. Do you have any other homeschooling stories you felt like you want to add or share?
Oh gosh, there's all kinds, but yeah, nothing around
I think
intuition.
we kind of covered that. I mean, between the 2 of us, I have 30 years of the homeschooling experience. My oldest daughter will be 34, because I feel like we started homeschooling before she ever went to kindergarten. Like, that's what you're usually doing with small children at home. You're homeschooling them, basically. What do you like to do? You like to do art. You like to do cooking. You like to do gardening. Like, you know, a lot of people are homeschooling without realizing they're homeschooling when they're taking care of the preschool age kids. But then, you know, it's just been a beautiful experience. As far as now, you know, ask a couple of my children, then they're like resentful that I didn't put them into school earlier or whatever. You know, I think they come back around and really appreciate what homeschooling provides, especially the wonderful Austin area homeschoolers. I couldn't have done homeschooling personally, I don't think, without Austin area homeschoolers and other moms and dads to be just picking their brain. Right. I read a whole lot of books around homeschooling and the subject, and then realized I just need to trust myself and my own intuition when it comes to each child. All 6 of my kids have different sun signs, different moons, different risings. It's a little sampler platter of society, my kids are. So just my job, I felt as their mom in homeschool, like I didn't feel like their teacher. I felt like it was my job to tune into them, to catch
Right.
what it was that they were interested in, and then try to go provide that and bring those kind of things into their environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I was totally using my psychic abilities in my homeschooling of my children. I think you're wired very similarly in that you just trust the hits that you get. And, it's, if you're freaking out about it, you're going to paralyze, you're going to traumatize yourself around it. But if you look and just tell yourself, we can do this. It's kind of like the 12-step one day at a time thing. I would just like, okay, what today are we going to learn or explore? And if the kids would be, I'm bored. Well, what do you want to do? Or just put it back on them. What do you feel like doing?
We did lots of hikes, and we were, and sometimes the hikes wouldn't go very far because we had to stop and watch, the water bugs or the fish or, explore the moss or whatever. But everything was science or math, like you were saying. It's like in the kitchen, in the backyard, in the bathtub. Everything was
right.
home.
I remember even doing things like they would help me write the grocery list of foods that, we talk about what they wanted to eat. So then what ingredients go into that? And then we would make a list to buy at the grocery store. And then, okay, well, I have this much money. Would you keep track of what we're going to be spending as we pick up things that they'd be calculating? Okay, the tomatoes are going to be $2 and they would keep, so that's another way of tracking math and stuff like that. And, like I said,
it's like, I just need $5 worth of bananas. Not bananas, that'd be a whole bushel, but apples, for instance. It's like just $5 worth, and they'd have to figure out how much $5 would be, you know. So it was just a life experience.
Yes.
My daughter said, I think in her mid-20s, I can't believe you did that to me. And now she sees the value of the interest in education and the value of her own education, because she basically had to teach herself, when it comes right down to it.
This is a fabulous life skill, by the way.
Yeah, it took me years to figure out how to do it. It's a shame. It's a real shame what happened to me in school. And it would have happened to her in one way, and it would have happened to my son as well, because he was the kid that, it's like, you can't sit down and do your math. Okay, go jump on the trampoline for 15 minutes and come back. You still do it. Okay, now run down to the lake and come back. Okay, now you can do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, that was go ahead.
I was just going to say I worked for a couple of brain doctors for a while, and there's this whole thing about crawling and the cross body and just the being able to sit down. But one of the things that one of these special ed teachers, when I was working for these doctors, this special ed teacher came in and she said, the first grade asked her to come in and talk to the kids and teach them how to read. And so she's in the front of the room lecturing them on, different ways that they need to deal with reading. And these are challenged readers. And so then the teacher walks back into the room, and there's 3 boys in the back of the room pacing back and forth in the room. I thought this was so profound. The teacher said, well, why are those kids up and walking around in the room? And this special ed teacher said, well, I thought I was here teaching them to read, not teaching them how to sit down.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, because that's what the Waldorf approach is, that when the children are young, they're supposed to be moving their bodies and experiencing and learning through the movement of their bodies. And they don't have the capacity to sit still and just take in information. That's a travesty, I think, that they're making. And I think that's why we have such a high rate of kids that are on medication and labeled ADHD, because they're just not allowed to move their body. Like you said, go move, and then you can sit down and focus. But when they're not moving, and anyway, we could go on and on about that. So, I think we've both been successful at homeschooling our children. Between us, we have 6 decades of homeschooling experience. It's funny because people who looked at me like I had 3 heads when they would find out I was a homeschooler now are asking me a bazillion questions. It's like, who knew the psychic would be ahead of the game and already like on board with the homeschooling. I feel like it's going to be a large wave of the future. Who knows when I feel like there's going to be at least another year of this pandemic lockdown and shutdown. And then we may never open up the way that we were before. And I feel like that this home learning, again, if you're getting out in nature, do that more. If you're sitting with your child and he can't adjust to that screen, don't force them, is what I would say. There's so many rich things that they can learn from getting out and exploring the world around them.
It's true.
Yeah. So tell us your website again and how people can get in touch with you if they want to get you to come to their property to do an herb walk, if they want to do private yoga work with you, if they want you as their wellness and health coach. How do they get in touch with you?
It's changemadewithease.com.
Change
made with ease. Yeah, it's singular. Change made with ease.
Okay, awesome. And I'll make sure and put that in the notes here under our video. It's been a pleasure, as always, with you today. Blessings. Thank you so much for creating time and space to do this with me. Right. And I want everybody to stay psyched up, okay? Peace.